All right. Good morning. In this first video on what I'm calling the essentials of arguing, we're going to go over some of the just basics. We're going to talk about ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos, a concept that some of you may or may not be familiar with. We're going to talk about inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning, and that'll likely be it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about claims. There are different kinds of claims you can make. And then that will transition into what is called the Toulmin system of argumentation. The video after that will be about classical argumentation. Video after that will be Rogerian arguments. That's kind of the spectrum of what I'm calling the essentials for arguing. All right. But start from square one, shall we? Now, many of you are likely familiar with, some of these basic concepts. You probably learned them in your English 101 classes or maybe even in high school, but I would be remiss if we did not go over them. So let's start with the basics. We have ethos, pathos, and we have logos. All right. Logos we refer to as logical appeals. So this is when you're using facts, evidence, reasoning, statistics, anything along those lines would be considered logical appeals. However, Aristotle in his book, Rhetoric, he said you can't just throw facts at people, you can't just logic them because they're going to fall asleep. So what you need to do is you need to add in some pathos, some emotion. So pathos is emotional appeals. Think of words like sympathy, apathy, empathy. Any of those PATH words speak to either an abundance of emotion or a lack of emotion or something along those lines, right? So again, Aristotle, he said, ideally you want a balance of both, right? You don't want too much logic or else you're going to bore your audience to tears. And you don't want it to be just all emotion because then you're going to get them all worked up for no real good reason, all right? Now, surrounding all of this is ethos. Now, ethos is often defined as ethics, which still kind of works for us, but rhetoricians tend to define it, ethos more as credibility. And some of the ancient rhetoricians really placed a high value on ethos. Everything that we do affects our credibility. The clothes we're wearing, the manner in which we're speaking. I think it was Socrates or one of the other early rhetoricians who would even go so far, or maybe it was Cicero, would talk about like even the tone, like there are different tones that you could use, and different situations call for different kinds of tone. So everything that we do affects our credibility. In modern times, we might look at things like if we're writing a paper or giving a speech, what sources are we using, right? Certain sources can increase our credibility, whereas other sources may take away from our credibility, okay? So ethos, pathos, logos, most people are familiar with. This is kind of basic, like I said, English 101 type stuff. However, there is another rhetorical element in all this that, for me personally, I'm slightly more a fan of. Something I think is extremely important that often gets left out of the discussion, and that's Kairos. Kairos was one of the gods of time, so along with Chronos and Aeon or Eon. And Kairos in rhetoric, it's often defined as a propitious moment. But that's kind of an obtuse definition. So the way I like to define Kairos is understanding how time and circumstance can affect the success or failure of your argument. So let's do a couple of quick examples. We'll do a silly example and then we'll do a serious example. So a silly example. Imagine you're 16 years old. Some of you might be 16 years old. It's Friday night. You want to go out, hang out with your friends, but you need to borrow your dad's car. Dad comes home from work and he's in a bad mood. You're probably not going to ask to borrow the car, right? You come down the stairs, ready to ask him. You see he's in a bad mood and you go, ooh, I'm going to wait. Maybe he has a beer, maybe 2 beers. And you say, gee, Pop, sure would be swell if I could take the Chrysler out. All of a sudden it's 1950s, Leave It to Beaver. Point being, right, you read the room, right? You understood the likelihood of your argument probably failing. Now, every now and then when I do this in class and I ask students, would you ask your dad to borrow the car? Most students say no. Every now and then I get a student who says yes, and they're the gambling type. So that's Kairos. So that's a silly example. A more serious example would be almost any time there's any sort of mass casualty event as a result of a shooting, almost inevitably there is a push for gun reform legislation. And many politicians are aware of this. They understand that emotions are raw, timing is right, this might be their chance, and then they make their push, right? So Kairos is being able to understand how time and circumstance may affect the success or failure of your argument. One final way we can look at it is reading the room. So as an example, let's say you're a team lead at a software development company, and your supervisor comes in and says, oh, get ready. I'm going to have you talk to some folks in like 30 minutes and tell them just the progress you're making on your project. Now, you might go in thinking like, oh, I'm speaking to other managers or maybe other team leads, stuff like that. But then you walk in and you see that it's members of the press or shareholders, right? The way that you would talk to other engineers or supervisors is going to be different from how you talk to the general public or people with a vested interest, et cetera, et cetera. We often refer to this as discourse, right? Discourse is a certain way of acting, doing, speaking, being. That's reading the room. Now, within Kairos, there are a couple of sub-concepts that I think are very important. The first is pre-pon. Pre-pon is understanding what's appropriate in your style, okay? So what's appropriate in your style? Not that you should take dating advice from an English professor, but asking someone out on a date is 100% Kairos. So this is a terrible example, but imagine you're at a funeral and you're sitting next to someone cute. Hey, what are you doing after this? You want to go out? Right? That's probably not the best time and place. And then it's the significant other, the person being there. So you're single now, right? Yeah, that's pre-pon. How you court someone is absolutely an exercise in Kairos. What's appropriate in your style? The other sub-concept that's important to understand is dynaton. Dynaton is understanding what's possible. The more realistic an argument is, the more likely it is to succeed. All right. And let me give you an example. Some time ago, I had a student writing a paper about social media and all the problems social media was causing. The student said, social media, it's leading to all these mental health issues, physical issues, social issues. And as a result of this, we should just get rid of social media. And sure, that would certainly solve the problem, but how likely is that to happen? Not very. A more realistic argument would be because social media is causing all these problems, parents and teachers need to be more involved in what young people are doing online, right? That is a more probable argument more likely to succeed. So that's Ethos, Pathos, Logos, Kairos. Sorry, I had to pause for a second. Now, let's talk about inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning. Catherine Schultz being wrong in chapter 6, she talks at length about inductive reasoning. All right, so inductive reasoning, let's put it on the whiteboard. It can be looked at as operating on probability. How inductive reasoning works is you begin with a conclusion and seek to produce premises that lead to that conclusion. Okay. Let me give you a few examples. So let's say you go grocery shopping one day, you're at Stater Brothers or Vons or whatever, and you go to the dairy section, you buy some milk, and then you buy some ice cream, and then you buy some cheese, and then you go home and you post up on the couch. You've got the tub of ice cream right here, milk in one hand, cheese in the other, and you're just going to town. And you're just chowing down on this milk, ice cream, and cheese. A couple hours go by, and then you get sick. Well, you look at the evidence, right? Okay, I've had ice cream, milk, and cheese. Those are all dairy products, so maybe dairy products make me sick. Now, that's entirely plausible. It's entirely possible. But it's also entirely possible that, maybe you just shouldn't eat that much dairy product in one sitting, right? Or maybe the cheese was a little funky. Maybe there was an ingredient in the ice cream that didn't sit well with you, right? Any of those are possible. And this is what Schultz talks about in chapter 6, is that inductive reasoning, when it works, it's fantastic, right? We don't have to stand there and like pontificate and think deeply about everything. Science, and many of the especially hard sciences, but even some of the soft sciences are often built on inductive reasoning. They have a hypothesis and then they test it to see if the hypothesis bears out, right? But it's when inductive reasoning goes wrong that leads to things like stereotyping and fallacies and just a whole host of issues with logic and with reasoning. So the opposite of inductive reasoning then is deductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning begins with a known fact, and from there produces premises that lead to a conclusion. So let's go back to the dairy example. Okay? Let's say you go to Kaiser and they run all the tests on you. And they come back and they tell you, we regret to inform you, but you have the lactose intolerance. And you storm out of there and you're like, science isn't real. Medicine's fake news. And you go to the grocery store and you get your ice cream, milk, and cheese. You go home, you eat it, then you get sick, right? How we work through a problem deductively is with something that's called a syllogism, okay, or syllogistic reasoning. And it works like this. We begin with a major premise. So this is the known fact, okay? I am allergic to dairy products. And then from there, we deduce minor premises. These are a little bit more specific. Ice cream, milk, cheese are dairy products. Now, this is also generally known. We don't really have to state this. If we didn't, it would be what's called an enthymeme. That's not really a big deal, and it's not totally necessary to know, but just know that that is a thing. So our major premise, our known fact, is I'm allergic to dairy products. I'm at the grocery store. I'm looking at the ice cream, the milk, and the cheese. These all have lactose. Therefore, I am allergic to ice cream, milk, and cheese. Okay. What we are trying to do when we work through an argument or when we are, reasoning deductively is we are trying to produce an argument that is sound in its logic. And in order for an argument to be sound, it needs to pass two tests. All right. So where T equals true, B is valid, and S is sound. Okay. So it has to be both true and valid. So true means it corresponds with reality. And V means the premises all logically connect. Okay. That's what we're going for. So before we can even entertain an argument, it needs to be both true and valid. Let me give you some examples of arguments that do not pass this test. Okay. Imagine two 6-year-old best friends. We'll call them Becky and Brittany. All right. Becky knows that the tooth fairy gives money for teeth, which can we also acknowledge is really creepy? Like this idea of a mythical figure like going around exchanging money for children's teeth. Like that's some serial killer stuff. Also, I swear I'm going to get back to it. I've heard from students that teeth are going for big bucks these days. I've had some students tell me they got like 20 bucks a tooth when they were kids. And to that, I said, well, let me go get my pliers out. I mean, that's beer money right there. 20 bucks. I got $1 if I was lucky. Anyway, so Becky knows the tooth fairy gives money for teeth. Becky loses a tooth, puts it under her pillow, goes to sleep. She wakes up in the middle of the night and sees her dad swapping the tooth for, we'll say, a 5, right? Let's look at the evidence. The tooth fairy gives money for teeth. Becky's dad is giving money for her tooth. Therefore, Becky's dad is the tooth fairy. And the next day, she's on the playground. She's talking with her best friend, Brittany. And Becky's like, I know who the tooth fairy is. And Brittany's like, who is it? Becky's like, it's my dad. Brittany's like, that's really weird because that means he was at my house last night. Obviously, this example does not pass the true test because the tooth fairy isn't real. But all those premises do connect logically. So it is a valid argument, but it is not a true argument. Therefore, it is not sound. Let's go the other way. Let's do an argument that is true, but not valid. All mammals are warm-blooded. That is a true statement. Whales are warm-blooded, also a true statement. Therefore, all mammals are whales. You see how there's a hiccup in the reasoning there, okay? So before we can even entertain an argument, it has to be both true and valid. Then from there, it's sound. Then we can start to kind of argue the merits of it and kind of go into it from there, right? But it has to be at least true and valid, all right? This was a shorter video on the basics of arguments or the essentials for arguing, ethos, pathos, logos, kairos. I hope this was helpful for you all. In the next video, I'm going to go over claims. There are several different kinds of claims we can make, which then leads to the Toulmin system of argumentation. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all in the next video. Take it easy.